It's early spring in the garden, and not much is growing, but it's Earth Day. So I thought it was really important to come out and make this video about how you can garden to help protect the climate. Gardening for climate change, gardening to reduce your carbon footprint. Much of what we do in gardening goes against nature, and in fact, gardening is really us manipulating nature. And sometimes we manipulate it more than others. Think of a grass lawn. Now, nature doesn't want that. Nature likes wildflowers and mixes of things and things that we would consider weeds mixed with trees and long grasses. It doesn't like that nice, lush, green, glossy carpet of lawn that we as humans tend to crave. And what goes into making a lawn look really lush and green can actually be not very green. Usually it takes a lot of extra water, some herbicides, it takes the space that could be going to flowering things that are good for the planet. And in the long run, a lawn actually is a carbon producer. It indirectly produces more greenhouse gases than it heals. My veggie garden as well goes against nature. Nature doesn't want me to grow 30 kinds of tomatoes. It's not what would naturally happen if I weren't out here cultivating and planting and trying to make it do that. But there are ways that you can manipulate gardening to be more climate friendly than others. So let's start with the basics. What is carbon? Carbon's an atom. And about the only thing that I remember from organic chemistry is that carbon is present in every molecule associated with life. Carbon is present in sugars, it's present in our DNA, it's at the depths of the earth, it's way up high in the sky. It is everywhere. Everywhere that there is life, there is carbon. So a carbon footprint, then, why is that bad for the planet if carbon's associated with life? It's because in the natural balance of things, carbon cycles from the way we breathe out and plants breathe in to deep in the earth, up high in the sky, captured, brought down again. This is called the carbon cycle. The problem is that the natural carbon cycle, the way that carbon is supposed to go from the earth to the sky and back again through every living thing, has been disrupted. Carbon that's in the ground or in carbon sinks is usually very stable, takes a long time to accumulate and to sit there. But when it's combusted or it's released into the atmosphere by things naturally breaking down, that's a fast process. And we as humans, in our consumption of things and emissions in particular, are pumping way more fast carbon out into the atmosphere than the planet can keep up with in creating its carbon sinks and bringing it back down into the earth. So we get a buildup of carbon in the atmosphere, and in the atmosphere, carbon traps heat, which is good to a point. It keeps the planet nice and warm enough to sustain life, but it's gone too far. It's warming up the planet to a point that we don't need and we don't want. And it's threatening our global food supply. In fact, it's threatening all of human life. It's very grim, it's very frightening, but the antidote to despair is action, and there are many things that we can do to combat this. So in this video, I'm going to tell you about how you can specifically garden to help to protect the planet. The first way to garden for the climate is to plant a wide variety of plants and to also encourage native plants that may have found their way to wherever you are. This is really good for biodiversity. And one in particular that I want to talk about is milkweed. So milkweed is the common name for the species of plants that are the sole food supply of monarch butterfly caterpillars. I did a video on hatching monarch butterflies in your home to help support the population a little while ago, and at the time, monarch butterflies weren't endangered, but now they are. it's really scary, and they need all the help that they can get to thrive and to build their populations back up. Monarchs are an important pollinator, and if we lose them, we're going to have a little bit more difficulty in maintaining the food supply we need to sustain human life and all life on the planet. The second thing I want to talk about in gardening to protect the climate is to avoid the use of broad pesticides. A pesticide may target the pest that's eating your cucumbers, but it's going to have some friendly fire effect on bees and butterflies, and those are really important for biodiversity and important for the planet to be able to heal itself and continue to nurture us. So instead of using pesticides, where you can, try and use natural methods such as interplanting, trap planting, and planting for beneficial insects. Interplanting is a method by which you don't use a bed for only one kind of crop. You'll have tomato next to bean with some carrots around, and then you'll have in another bed farther away your tomatoes and maybe beans in another one again. And what this does is it confuses pests because they don't find a nice feast of whatever they're going after all at once. It also allows the plants to help each other. If you plant herbs around many different kinds of plants, the smell of them will confuse pests and help to keep them at bay. Trap planting is when you plant two kinds of plants together that a certain kind of pest likes, but it's going to go after the sacrificial trap instead of the plant that you're trying to grow. And one of my favorites for this is nasturtiums with peppers. If I plant a nasturtium next to a pepper, if I happen to have a problem with aphids, the aphids go after the nasturtium and leave my pepper alone. And then I can just cut off the nasturtium, feed it to the chickens, aphids and all, and they get the extra protein from that, and my peppers are okay. And then planting for beneficial insects means planting a wide variety of plants, many of which flower, and one of the best shapes of flower you can use is this umbelliform flower, which is like the top of a dome with these little tiny flowers all around it, much like the shape of a dillweed when it flowers. And what the beneficial insects such as lacewings or hoverflies or bumblebees will do is they'll help to pollinate your garden so that you get really good fruit production and veggie production. But they'll also go and often eat the pests. So if you have really good interplanting, trap planting, and planting for beneficial insects, you may never actually see a pest because it's dealt with before it becomes a problem. Now, those are the beneficial insects above ground. They're beneficial insects underground as well. And they can be beneficial to the planet as well as to your garden. I'm talking earthworms, but also soil microbes. When a plant takes in carbon dioxide, it uses the carbon from the air to make sugars and to feed itself, to grow, to do all the things that a plant wants to do. But it does take in, usually, a little more carbon than it needs. So the excess goes through the roots and into the soil down below, where it is used to feed soil microbes and things that live underground. And they do a really good job of holding on to the carbon there so it doesn't go out into the atmosphere. Out into the atmosphere, that's what we have too much of now. We want to reduce that, and we want to carbon sink and hold on to the carbon in our plants and in the soil. What we can do to help is to disturb the soil as little as possible. When we interfere by digging and by tilling, we make it harder for the soil microbes and organisms to do their job. And more of that carbon is going to make it out into the atmosphere because it can't be held on to as well. So when you're adding organic matter to your garden, be it soil or compost or mulch, try to layer it on top. Try to disturb the soil as little as possible, and you'll help the planet out. When you're taking out your spent plants as well, leave the roots down. The roots will decompose naturally and will help your future garden. And that's particularly true for certain types of plants. So for example, beans, if you leave the roots in the ground, that will add extra nitrogen to your garden. Marigolds, if you leave the roots in the ground, it's going to help fight certain kinds of harmful pathogens that might otherwise attack your next year's crop. So it's good for the garden, good for the planet, good for everybody. So when you've got a spent plant, just cut it off, at the soil level. Boop. And let the roots do their thing underground. Speaking of nurturing your plants, now this can go into my compost. And compost is a great way that you can garden for the environment as well. You don't have to have a big compost bin like this or a triple bin like I'm aiming to get, but any kind of way that you can divert organic matter from the landfill is going to help the planet. This could be a vermicomposter, a bokashi composter that you just keep under your kitchen sink. You can just put your organic waste into the city composter and not have to deal with it yourself. You can have a backyard composter like this. You can have all of the above. And in any kind of compost that you choose to do, you're going to reduce the carbon that gets released to the atmosphere as these organic matters break down. More of it is going to be held in the organic matter itself, and more of it's going to be available to your future plants should you want to use your compost in the garden. If you do put organic matter into a landfill, it will still break down, but the microbes that break it down tend to be anaerobic and they tend to create methane. And methane is a direct greenhouse gas. It's directly making the problem worse. So the more that you can compost or divert your organic matter towards someone else that composts, the better it is for the planet. And the last thing that I want to talk about is reducing your carbon footprint by eating ultra-locally, by making your own food, by growing your own food. Because any food that you can get from your backyard or your balcony is food that didn't have to be transported to the store, didn't have to be stored at the store or refrigerated. All of these things increase the carbon footprint of the food that you consume. And being able to get it just from outside or inside is going to reduce your carbon footprint little by little. Few of us are able to grow even most of the food that we eat. But every little bit helps, especially if many people are getting at least a little bit of the things that they would consume anyway from as local a place as possible. That's going to really help the planet a lot. One of the main ones that I think about are herbs. Even without a garden like mine, without even outdoor space, you can grow herbs at home. And herbs are a really good example of something that has a fairly high carbon footprint at the store and is going to save you a lot of money and save the planet an awful lot of carbon footprint if everybody were to grow just one kind of herb that they like to use in their home, on their balcony, or in their garden. So here I have some chives, and I love growing chives in the garden. They'll grow all year, sometimes they'll flower, which is good for the pollinators as well. I can just come out and snip off whatever I want when I want it and use it right away nice and fresh. If I buy it from the store, then it's had to be transported to the store, often not from a place that's very local at all. It's stored in plastic at the store, single-use plastic. It's refrigerated, and almost always most of the package is going to wilt before I get to use it. So if you can take one thing and grow it to eat locally, let it be herbs. Indirectly, growing your own food is also really good for your carbon footprint, I think, because it really can ground you to where your food comes from. And for me, it inspires me to be less wasteful with foods that I purchase outside the home and the foods that I grow. And it really connects me to nature and inspires me to do things like make this video in the hope that it a little bit can help climate change. The last thing I want to drive home is that this is not about perfection. There's a saying that I really love, which is don't sacrifice a good job in pursuit of a perfect job. And what that really means is that nobody is going to be able to get it 100% right. So I have a lot of wood and metal in the things that I use in the garden, but I also have plastic. I have 3 rain barrels and I like to use collected water to water the garden, but I also use a sprinkler sometimes. And the way that I garden is not 100% best way, best practice for the environment all the time. But I reasonably do my best, and that's all that I can ask of anybody else. Reasonably do your best and do a good job. Even if you can't do a perfect job, if you can do a good job, if other people can do a good job, we can make a huge impact. Be kind to yourself, be kind to the planet. I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please let me know. Please share it. Please subscribe. And however your garden grows, keep growing as a gardener. Ooh, it's garlicky.